So, Alex, how was your 2023?
It was a good year. Let's dive more into it on this episode. So this episode is our movies that shaped our 2023. This is Alex from Los Angeles.
And this is Karen from San Francisco. Welcome to Movies That Shaped Us. We're two longtime friends who grew up on opposite ends of the globe with very different backgrounds, but were both shaped and are still being shaped by the movies we see and love. In each episode, we'll cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through three of our favorite movies. So, you already talked about this, Alex. Our topic for today is the year 2023. So, not necessarily our top movies of this year, which, by the way, spoiler alert, we will do an episode on, but these are the movies that shaped our year. Talk to us about how your year was and how you thought about this list.
Yeah, so this is like you were saying, an episode we do every year that I find really fun and interesting just from looking back on the year, thinking about the major themes and then which
Mhm.
movies either I saw this year, old and new, that kind of fit those themes. Yeah, it was just typical, like thinking back on what the major things this year, whether it was mainly feelings, like feelings that I felt throughout the year and moments in the year that I think I will always think back on 2023 and be like, yep, that was the year that, I felt kind of like this, or these things were happening that were affecting me personally. And then the movies were actually pretty easy for this year for me. Like it was once I kind of figured out what the themes were going to be, which is like the hard part of this. The movies like, oh yeah, well it's definitely going to be these three that we'll be covering on this episode. What about you?
Yeah, similar, although I think my approach was probably the opposite. I sort of thought about the movies when I watched them,
Hmm.
which were the ones that had the most impact on me, and then I tried to dig deeper into why.
Mm.
And then it's just so happened that, yeah, those movies had an amazing impact on me because they were resonant in a deep way in terms of what was going on with me and, this year in my life and such. So a little bit of the opposite. And it turns out all of these movies are movies that I had not seen before.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, oh, that's
So
fun.
which is kind of, I think, what I did last year as well.
Mm.
Because there's something about the surprise of a movie, even though it may be a very, very well-known movie that just hits you
Hmm.
and opens a sort of new portal and it becomes resonant to your life. So yeah, very excited to get into all these movies.
Cool. So why don't you kick us off then with your first movie that shaped your 2023? What do you got for us, Karan?
All right, so my number three is a little movie that nobody's heard of, The Wizard of Oz. From 1939. I'd never watched this movie in full, which
Wow.
is probably shameful to admit as a movie lover on a movie podcast, but it just is. But quick log line if nobody knows, young Dorothy Gale and her dog Toto are swept away by a tornado from their Kansas farm to the magical land of Oz and embark on a quest with three new friends to see the wizard who can return her to her home and fulfill the other's wishes. Starring obviously Judy Garland, Frank Morgan, Ray Bolger, and directed by a million directors, but primarily Victor Fleming and King Vidor. So this movie obviously is sort of canonized. What can I even say about this movie?
Hmm.
And for whatever reason, I just always, this was not a childhood classic that played at home. We were more
Interesting.
of a Mary Poppins and Sound of Music kind of household. So this movie kind of never hit us when we were
Hmm.
growing up.
Hmm.
And then when I got older, I just was like, oh, this is a kids movie. And I just never watched it fully. I obviously seen sequences. Everybody knows the red shoes and all of that, right? But just
Hmm.
never sat down and made time for it. And then this year, just sort of randomly, me and my boyfriend, we just said that, oh, let's just watch it. And he obviously gave me shit for the fact that I'd never seen this movie. 'Cause it's like, how can you claim to be a movie lover if you've not seen The Wizard of Oz? I was like,
Uh-huh.
yeah, I get it. And it sort of blew me away, in all its glory and its message and its meaning and how beautifully it's done in his performances. But the thing that really resonated with me, which is kind of the message of the movie, which is that there could be stuff going around you in the world, in your situations and circumstances, but ultimately you have to fight your own demons. You have to go out there and find the head and the heart and the soul and the might and the courage and overcome all that. And I think this year was a big year in terms of transitions from a work standpoint and
Hmm.
things, looking up and then not looking up, or things changing and taking a different direction. But then apparently that direction is not the one that you wanted to be on. It's sort of classic life. But I think we all, especially post pandemic, I feel like are settling in, transitioning still, I think. And
Hmm.
whether it has to do with the pandemic and the world stopping down or no, but or just, the age that we are in, the beginning of the 40s decade is an interesting time period in a lot of people's lives.
Hmm.
And that's the decade we are in now.
Yes, yeah, you can age us.
Yeah.
It's okay. Yeah, we are old. Yeah.
So there's a little bit of that happening too. But yet, the message of the movie really hit me hard this time. And I'm in a way, I feel lucky that I watched this movie now, to kind of fully get it. I'm sure as a kid or as a younger person, I would have enjoyed it for all its technical glory and brilliance and music and singing and all of it. But this time it was the full package. But before I go on, I know you watched this movie and love it.
Yeah, this movie is, at least in the States, was on TV all the time, and
Yeah.
a movie that myself and my two sisters would watch all the time as, really young children. So I had seen this, dozens of, times, maybe even like close to 100, right? Like growing up, it was
Wow.
like always on. Then like I didn't watch it for a long time, and then came back to it twice in the last 20 years, just as more of, I watched it once after college, then once about 10 years ago until this rewatch. So it's not a movie that I watch a lot as a movie now as an adult, but every time
Mm,
I see it as an adult, now this is like the third time, it just strikes me more as like what a marvel the film is, like from a production standpoint. Like the
mm,
set design is incredible, especially now that you can see this, restored in HD. Watching this
yeah.
as a kid, it's on a VHS copy or on, TNT or something. You can't really see a lot of these amazing painted backgrounds, and the visual
Mm,
effects are just incredible. Like the flying monkey sequence, a lot of the stuff with Glinda when she comes in the bubbles and things like that.
yeah.
Just the visual
Amazing.
effects are incredible. The smoke, with the Wicked Witch sort of appears and disappears. So at that, I've sort of now been appreciative of this movie a lot more on a technical level than I was as a kid. You're just like, oh, this is cool. Like, you just like the action and the, you get like the allegories of, oh, these things are in you all the time. Like you say, the scarecrow wants a brain, but then throughout the course of the film, he's always the one to work out
Hmm.
plans. So he actually always had the brain the whole time, and that's sort
Hmm.
of like the message of the film too, that it's all these things are inside you, even though you think you
Right.
might not have the courage. It's deep inside you. You have to unlock it. No one can really give you
Yeah.
courage, right? Which is the message of the film. Yeah, no, it was fun to rewatch it now, third time as an adult, and just continue to appreciate what a sort of lightning in a bottle that they captured here. Like you said, multiple directors. There's a lot of problems in the set and things like that. Like usually there are with these classic films, but
Yeah.
it is a movie that is just has something really unique and special about it. So it was fun to watch this again.
And we haven't called out Judy Garland specifically. I mean, this performance, I mean, now we know the background of sort of how hard it was for her and
Hmm.
everything that went on in the production of the movie, but she's just so incredible
Hmm.
as a performer. And then, I mean, Over the Rainbow, when that song comes, you just can't help but just weep
Hmm.
because it's just her voice just has so much power. And maybe now because we know so much about her life, her legacy and everything, but it just hit me so hard just watching that. And it's not just the song and the singing, but like you said, all the technical elements as well and what this means. It's just such a multi-layered movie, which I don't even know if they were intending for it to be that way because the production story of this movie, like you said, is so troubled,
Hmm.
which is why it's sort of hard to know that how intentional was this versus what it ended up being, because this could have just been like a fun children's movie, and maybe that's how it was regarded as when it
Hmm.
first came out. It's only over time you see all these different layers of the movie, and it'll always be in our consciousness. I think it's evergreen, and it'll always appeal to anybody and everybody of all ages. And that's sort of the power of this movie. And such a movie feels like comes along every few decades, and there's a reason why this movie stands the test of time.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it's like a once in a generation sort
Yeah.
of film classic, and it definitely is on the, if you ask a random person anywhere on the world, oh, name like 10 movies, this probably would show up, along with some like, Star Wars or what have you, right? They would say a couple
Yes.
things, and Avatar, right? But people would say Wizard of Oz. Like it definitely has that much resonance worldwide. I mean, maybe not so much in India, I guess. So this wasn't on TV a lot in India growing up, or you just
I guess
wasn't,
not.
huh?
Yeah,
Interesting.
it's a bummer that it didn't hit me then, or I guess my parents had not seen it either because they really made it a point for us to watch Mary Poppins and
Hmm.
these kind of Hollywood musicals from the 60s, but not so much this one
Hmm.
for whatever reason.
Yeah, maybe it didn't make it in terms of their generation. It
Yeah,
had resonance to them, so they're not, they want to share the
didn't get
movies that
passed
they
down.
loved growing up, right? So that it wasn't something that passed down. Versus like my parents would tell me about how, they would watch this on TV and it would come on TV like, every holiday season, like
Right.
Thanksgiving or Christmas, they'd play it on TV, even though they grew up with black and white TV. So that famous scene when the transitions into color, like you would
Uh,
never notice that on TV
uh,
because it was a black and white TV. So they were talking to me about, oh, the first time they realized that was even a thing, which is an incredible VFX shot too of how they
amazing.
painted the set to look sepia, used the stand-in for Judy Garland in a black and white costume for that so the camera can see it in black and white when she opens the door and the camera goes into the color world. Then the actual Judy
Unbelievable.
steps in because you couldn't do that any other way. It's just absolutely brilliant. But it was funny, like they didn't see that until they finally saw it in theaters like years later, because on TV it just all looked black and white to them. The other thing that just struck me on this for some reason rewatch. I mean, I always love Toto. Toto's always the best.
Mhm.
But in this rewatch of like this dog is so well trained. The
Oh my gosh.
stuff that his name was Terry in real life. The stuff that Terry would do is just amazing. Like from jump, like this amazing leap that the dog does, like off of in the witch's castle to like go and then find the three, the Tin Woodsman and the Scarecrow and
Hmm.
the Lion to save Dorothy. Like Toto does like so he's even pulling at the curtain to reveal that the wizard's a fraud. I don't know. I just appreciated the dog acting a lot more this time out. Toto's just is amazing. I love
Toto
him.
is amazing and very cute. Yeah, I also have to call out just the friendship aspect. I know all the characters are all just inside you and all part of Dorothy, but it's
Well,
just so
we don't. Who knows? Who knows?
who knows,
Who
right? That's
knows?
one
Yeah.
interpretation, right? But
Right. Yeah.
just this is the friendship aspect of all of them together is
Hmm.
also just so earnest and sweet and moving. Another reason why the movie works and another reason why it's such a lightning in the bottle because it's just so hard to for our jaded selves now to have this kind of sweet earnest kind of friendship
Right.
depicted on screen that they're just genuinely excited to just be with each other and care for each other, and now this would be labeled saccharine, or I guess we wouldn't be able to do it the
Right.
way this is done.
Hmm.
And then I guess the last thing I would say after hearing you just talk about this, my mission for the next year is to watch this movie on the big screen.
Mm.
If it plays somewhere, I don't know if there is a 70 millimeter print of this or no, but I
Yeah.
guess not.
Yeah. They didn't have this in 70, but
Yeah,
usually it plays at least some. In LA, it'll play
has to
somewhere.
be.
I think even this past fall, there was screenings of the Academy Museum of this. I mean, this you will be able to see this at the big screen. And actually, I don't think I've ever seen this in a theater, which would
Okay,
be a
well, we
cool
should
thing to
make
do.
a
Yeah, we should try to have
we should do it.
A Wizard of Oz get together. One other point I'll just make too is in terms of this year and this movie for me, there is a little bit of a connection between 2023 and this movie where I stumbled across this theory that's been around since the 60s apparently, but I had never seen it before about a sort of hidden message in this film, which I will say, like growing up too, there was always the connection you can make between Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, which is like a
Yeah.
record, and you play it in the same way. What you hit play on the record as you're hitting play on the movie, and it sort of like narrates what's going on. It's sort of a fun, sort of druggy kind of like, look, everything it's all these connections, man. So I've done that. I've known about that. It was fun to actually rewatch this movie now that I know this theory where the reason why the book was written, it was a kid's book that was written in 1900 by Frank L. Baum. And he was, at that time in America, there was a big battle over the gold standard versus including silver as well to increase the money supply. And there's all these debates for like decades over this. And this movie is essentially, or the book, and then the movie, I guess, is an allegory about the fight over bimetallism, it was called. So it's like
Mm,
Dorothy stands in for the average American, Scarecrow's the farmer, Tin Man is industrial workers, the Lion is William Jennings Bryan, who's a big politician in the U.S. at this time. That was his nickname. The Munchkins are like citizens of of the US, who's sort of a mob that sort of doesn't really know which way to go. The Wicked Witch of the East is Wall Street, and they're trying to
mm,
control the money supply by only having the gold standard. That's why it's a yellow brick road. And
mm.
Oz is Washington, D.C., and the Wizard is the politicians who are sort of like lying and they're frauds and they're telling you things even though they actually have no power and they don't kind of aren't really helpful for you at all, much like the Wizard in this movie doesn't do anything. He just claims he is, and then it's really
Right, it's
like
not even real.
it's not even real, right? It's all about you. And in the book, she had silver slippers instead of ruby ones. So it was once she realized the power of combining silver and gold together, that's what would lead her to prosperity. And I read this and I was like, oh, this is kind of silly. And then I watched the movie this time, like through that lens, and I was like, whoa, like I do
Makes
see all the
sense.
hidden messages in this. This all makes sense. And then, the big one at the end of this article that I read about this in the middle of the summer, I just stumbled across this is that it's called The Wizard of Oz, and OZ is the abbreviation for ounces, which is how they, gold and silver is all done in ounces. So the whole thing is
Whoa.
supposed to be this like political allegory that, always went over my head. And it was fun to actually watch this movie for the podcast after having read this article because I didn't actually have time to go back and like, oh, I was thinking like I should watch Wizard of Oz again just through this lens of bimetallism and do I believe this theory could be true? And I think it could. I was like, I
That's
see this
amazing.
as a new message of this movie that
Yeah,
is kind of fun.
that's amazing. I mean, that's not the beauty of these classics, right? That I mean, who knows this is how it was meant to be,
Right, of course, yeah, but it's
but the
fun, right?
fact that that's what the beauty of the classics is that now that they're in the canon, we all get to kind of dissect them, analyze them, apply different theories to them, which I think further strengthens the power of these classic films, right? Because
Mhm.
they're so multidimensional in that sense.
Right, you can
Um,
kind of attack them from all these different angles, right? And again,
exactly.
this new political message I never saw in the film before. And now, like, I want to go back and like watch the film more, looking for these messages, much like kids did with that Dark Side of the Moon album. Like, I remember that being a big thing in high school. People talking about that. It's like, oh, you got to do it, man. It's so cool. Like, the songs match what's going on,
I
which
love
was
it.
true too. Actually, it was
Yeah, I'm
interesting to kind of
sure.
see that. Which obviously that was not, I don't think,
Intentional, obviously. No, it
intentional
can't
for
be.
Pink Floyd, but it's still
No,
fun. But like you said, it just shows the power of few movies I think could attain a status like this, where we're still talking about these hidden messages and themes and syncing it up
right.
to this and that. I mean, that's Wizard of Oz is probably half a dozen movies that fall into that category, and it just is. It's a
Totally.
special film.
And just such a blueprint and gold standard for movies of this kind, but all kinds, because it's such a classic story.
Right.
Like it's fun to watch this movie in the year of Barbie, which, I enjoyed
Yeah.
Barbie and have, but it's a certain parts that maybe didn't quite land on me as well. But it's amazing to see Greta and the team kind of build this entire Barbie land out of, cloth and
Mm-hmm.
paint and tin
Mm-hmm.
and everything. It's a great kind of, and she talks about Wizard of Oz and how influential that movie was for her in general, but also for Barbie. So it's kind of fun that we are coming back in a way to get out of the CG jail that we've been in for the
Mm-hmm.
last decade and do stuff practically. And it's just a different textural thing that it brings, not just to the movie, but also to the performances, because it's real, right? Like we are all
Right.
humans after all.
Mm-hmm.
If you're walking through Yellow Brick Road and watching all this around you, you're going to act and react differently for sure.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. No, it was fun to revisit this, and it's amazing to hear this is the first time you've seen it. So that's
I
great that
know.
it
Crazy.
that it lived up to, I guess, I'm assuming you had a
Oh,
hype in your
yeah.
mind of like what this would be, right?
It beat the hype, honestly.
Yeah.
Because I just was like, oh, how good could this be?
Hmm.
And it was amazing.
Yeah.
All right. What is your number three movie that shaped your 2023?
So my number three film is the only movie that I'm bringing to the list that is released this year, and it was, or it is, The Creator, released this year, written and directed, co-written and directed by Gareth Edwards, starring John David Washington, Gemma Chan, Allison Janney, and Madeline Voiles. The IMDb plot summary: against the backdrop of a war between humans and robots with artificial intelligence, a former soldier finds the secret weapon, a robot in the form of a young child. So one major theme that for me out of this year is, and maybe for a lot of different folks, is this new focus now on AI again. I mean, I feel like
Mhm.
every couple decades we're like, oh, robots could, eventually take over for humans with artificial intelligence. But this year I do think we reached a tipping point. And it was
Mhm.
something not only was big in the news, also my job, I think we've shared in the past before, like both of us are in tech. And I think this is something that is here to stay as a technology, especially with Chat GPT. I really think was the tipping point of really bringing this to a point where an average person could sort of understand
Right.
and harness the power of what artificial intelligence could do. And at the same time, I think there were a lot of things I was thinking about this year too, of the downsides of this, of replacing humans and a lot of creativity. That was a big theme of, we had a big strike this year for WGA, the Writers Guild in Hollywood, and SAG, the Actors Guild, and AI was a big part of this. Don't replace
Mhm.
us with AI. I also feel kind of threatened as well, with my job at some point being replaced. And there's a lot of these questions about the negative sides of AI. But what this film, which it is flawed, and I'll get more into the film later, but it actually positions AI more as a uh, sort of a next stage of human evolution, these AI robots more as people. So
Mm.
it was interesting to me coming into this movie, and again, AI in general, being kind of skeptical about it and seeing more of the bad than the good applications of this, that this movie actually maybe kind of opened my eyes a little more to, what, actually, like, especially if these do become, maybe this is a life, right? An AI could be considered similarly to having a soul, right? And at that point, then we should be treating them on the same level as humans. Which what this film grapples with is that basic choice. I mean, there's a opening montage that's a great one of like a newsreel, which is essentially an alternate past of like, well, what if in the 50s and 60s we were developed AI technology? How would that evolve to the point where in the present in this film, which I think is probably like the mid 21st century, the AIs are actually just as good as humans, and there's an attack that happens where Los Angeles gets nuked, and then all of a sudden, the United States at least is very much against AI and
Mm.
fighting, fighting against them and trying to exterminate them across the world, and just positioning the AIs as victims as opposed to the oppressors, which is typically what a lot of movies do, right? HAL
Mhm.
9000 or The Matrix or Terminator. This movie presented them as a victim. So like, well, maybe I shouldn't be as skeptical against AI and thinking all just the bad things. I mean, yeah, bad things can happen, but there also could be a lot of good as well with, a new phase of our evolution as just living beings. So I'm kind of paused there, but that was why I wanted to bring something in with AI. And I was thinking about maybe some older movies. And then I saw this one and I was like, oh, wow, this actually made me think differently about artificial intelligence in a way that I don't think I would have if I hadn't seen this film, which again, it is flawed. And maybe we can talk more about the actual film in a bit, but curious
Yeah.
on your thoughts on AI and as well as this film.
Yes, similarly, there is obviously a feeling of scare and all the bad things that could happen, but at the same time, it's obviously kind of a massive leap forward in terms of how we as a society and civilization can accomplish things and collaborate with each other and deepen and just make our pursuit for whatever we are after better and richer. There's no question. It kind of multiplies that by a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like even before the movie, I've been in kind of both those camps that this has, like all things that have a lot of power, right? If not
Mm-hmm.
used properly and if not put to the right context, they can have a lot of harm, but they can also have a lot of great.
Mm-hmm.
So, in many ways, it sort of comes back to the humans. Because guess what? What is the AI repeating after and multiplying after? It's the patterns that it is learning from that were created and done by humans in the first place, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, in many ways, that all the theories of AI kind of owning the world and doing bad things, it's not going to have that out of thin air. It's going to mirror and replicate based on what we've sort of taught it in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So, if anything, I sort of feel that the accountability on us as humans even doubles with a technology like this being out there. And I think in a way the movie kind of underlines that too, because the problems that happen where things go haywire, it was because an error in the code that humans
Hmm.
made, right?
Right.
So it's very much in there. Now, can AI and machines have feelings, and are they humans that we are friends with in that sense? I don't know. Maybe it's sort of, I'm not there yet to kind of
Hmm.
fully say that. And the movie obviously makes that case that they have feelings. And of course, if you have like a little cute child, the way it is in this movie, who looks the way she does, the way she talks, she's just so cute.
Hmm.
Of course, that has an impact. But the movie asks some good questions, intentionally or unintentionally, that is that a manipulation of the movie and even AI, that now you're, as a human, starting to look at this child robot as an actual child, or should you even be doing that, and I
Hmm.
think that's a question that we'll keep kind of bumping against and keep trying to answer over the next few decades as this becomes more and more real.
Yeah, and I think I'd always looked at that as a bad thing, meaning like,
Yeah.
we shouldn't get to even the point where we'd even have that question. Like I want to
Yeah.
try to save our species before we get replaced. But what this movie I think does is, and I think this does come from Gareth Edwards, who his past couple films he did Godzilla, and then his first film was Monsters from
Hmm.
like an indie film. And I think definitely his worldview is humans are awful, and the sooner we're exterminated as a race, the better. That seems to be his worldview, which I don't agree with. But seeing this movie, I'm like, actually, the way that they position the humans as being really terrible in this, and the robots actually are the ones who want peace, don't want to be attacked. They don't want to cause any problems. They just want to live their lives. But it's the Americans slash the bad side of humanity, right? It's just trying to exterminate them. I was thinking, which maybe is again the thing that this movie wants you to think is, yeah, maybe they are the better versions of us. Like
Mm.
they're the best sides of our nature, and in this movie, at least, the Americans represent the worst sides of humanity, like the absolute like worst things that we ever could do are what the Americans do in this. And you're kind of like, yeah, maybe they should be exterminated. Like this is maybe better for the world if they were gone and actually the AIs were the ones replacing humans. And I think the movie does that subtly too with some scenes where animals, like some dogs and then monkeys, are like helping out the resistance fighters
Mm.
against the Americans. Like they're placing bombs and it's very subtle. They only kind of do in a couple scenes and they never address it. It's not like the animals are they talk or they're being used as troops from the resistance fighters or anything. But it's sort of, I think, is saying this thing of like, we're now like even nature is against the Americans and then therefore like the dark side of humans. And I thought that made me think a little bit more of like, maybe actually not that I say I want the extermination of the human race. However, if I think of it more of an evolution standpoint of, well, the next part of us is we are the creators of something else, and all the good that is in humans gets programmed into these AIs. And as long as there is a life and a quote unquote soul in there, maybe that is the where we're gonna go as a species. As like our bodies are die off and things, and now we are just gonna be code, which maybe we're code in some semblance right now anyway. And, just sort of electromagnetic, brain impulses and things like that, and DNA. I mean, this is all essentially could be viewed as code. And I don't know, I just never thought about it in that way of opening my mind up a little bit until I saw this film, which again, I don't think is perfect. I think the setup is great, the world building is incredible, but it
Hmm.
falls apart very fast, like over the course as the movie
Yeah,
goes
it's too
along.
convoluted.
It's like, yeah, too much stuff doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And by the end, I'm like, this is just too long. Like, I don't really care what's happening. There's a whole sequence at the end with John David Washington on a spaceship as they're
Yeah.
trying to like destroy it. And I'm just sort of like, I don't know, get like, I don't care. Like,
Yeah.
end movie. Like,
End the
I'm done.
movie. Yeah. It's too many
But
holes.
right, but I do think it raised a lot of really interesting questions that
Agreed.
about this topic that I was very sort of more of a Luddite against, of like we should slow down, stop. Like this is not necessarily, it's more of a bad than a good. But after this movie, I was like, I don't know, maybe like we could there could be more of a balance there. It just depends on who's wielding the power, which I think is another thing this movie also touches on again with the Americans in this movie representing like the worst use of technology possible.
Yeah.
This sort of floating death spaceship that just kind of can go anywhere in the world and kill anyone that they want, totally unaccountable to anyone, which I do think represents a lot of what America is, at least in the 21st century. One of the most anti-American movies I've seen in a really long time, actually. I don't know if you kind of got that
Yeah.
sense too, but like they were definitely the villains fighting against the rest of the world and also the AIs, which I thought was interesting as well. But I think this movie should be seen personally, like
Yeah.
from especially a production standpoint. It looks beautiful, just
Yeah.
incredible cinematography and
Especially at
action.
the budget it's at, it's
Oh
amazing.
my God, yeah, yeah. It looks like it costs as much as Avatar, like $400 million,
Yeah.
but it's like 80 million. Like that's insane.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
wish it was there on the story standpoint too. It just I think it's the story is very middling. The acting's not great either from John David Washington, who's
No,
someone I don't think is that good of it. I still just don't think he works in really anything I've seen him in,
I agree.
unfortunately. But I did think the film again raised a lot of interesting questions.
I agree. And yeah, whether it's extermination or whether it's coexistence, that's the question the movie also asks. Because the flip side is that, yeah, like I was saying earlier, AI ultimately is based off of what it's learning in terms of
Hmm.
human patterns and behaviors. The issue is that AI has the capability or capacity to just scale so rapidly
Hmm.
across the entire world, which no single human or group of humans can ever do. It'll take years and years, right, for a dictator or a certain military power to kind of rise up
Hmm.
to have that kind of control. AI can do that in a matter of probably seconds if
Hmm.
it were at that scale. And that sort of is the big danger, I think, is to how do you sort of coexist and keep that in check. But then you bring up an interesting argument that if human emotion and creativity and that DNA, maybe its evolution is to exist in this sort of form. It
Right.
that I never thought about that before the movie. And yeah, I still don't know how I feel about it, because
Yeah.
if that's the case, then what is all this about anyway? If we are just like consciousness coded somewhere, with it's so untangible in my mind
Hmm.
right now that
Hmm.
I can't even wrap my head around it. But it's certainly a thought.
Yeah.
I can sort of see it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there was a scene that where they're explaining one of the AIs like switched herself off, like basically committed suicide when her AI child was dead, or so like that is a like killing yourself because of loss was that is a
Mm,
human trait that
mm.
when they said that I was like, oh, well then these are like basically they have souls, they are alive, which I think was the movie was that's why they put those lines in there. But yeah, I was thinking, yeah, well then what's the difference between us and them? And maybe they're better than humans. But yeah, it is a lot of
Yeah,
heady. This movie raised a lot of very heady
a
things.
lot of heady things.
Doesn't answer them, and I think it doesn't kind of throws the theme out there and then kind of runs away from it a lot of times. Which again, I don't think this movie was perfect. It needed like one or two more passes on the screenplay, and then maybe hire a better lead. And then this movie, I think, really would be a classic in terms of how it deals with these things that are very resonant in
Yeah.
2023, at least for me, for sure. And
Oh
it,
yeah,
it helped me
for me
change my
too.
mind on some things.
I think the key thing is that these questions cannot be answered. In my mind,
Hmm.
like if the movie had like fewer questions and then just kind of lets them sit and be and breathe for us to kind of wrestle with, I think it's a much more successful movie because we are in it right now. I don't think we
Hmm.
have the answers, and having an answer one way or the other would also ring false because it'll be preachy and just not backed entirely because we just don't know.
Right,
But
right, right.
yeah, no, it's an interesting time, but a scary time too. I don't think we can litigate all of AI on this
Oh,
podcast
right. Yeah.
for
Maybe we can have
sure.
another
But
episode about it.
yeah, the movie did ask some great questions that changed my mind to us, but I'm still more in. There's a scare part to it too, I think for
Hmm.
sure, just because of how out of control this can be, and I guess the thing that we've not mentioned is the whole thing of the nirmata and stuff like that, right? Which is like who is the creator ultimately, and
Right.
I think that's the other thing that the movie raises is that what right do we have to be creators of machines that in some ways then we are assuming the role of God or
Right.
whoever the power might be, and is
Hmm.
that okay or not?
Right,
That's the
right.
other question.
Right, totally. Yeah, like humans. Think the movie toys around with that word creator. I mean, is it Gemma
Yeah,
Chan? Is it John David Washington? Because he's
right,
sort of the surrogate dad of the child who's the new
right.
evolution because the child can age as an AI. But no, I think those are the largest questions of all, right? Can't do are we if we have the opportunity to be gods, should we? And
Right.
by doing this, does that automatically de facto make us a god if we are creating a new species, technically like a new species or a new life form like that? And then what are
Right.
all the implications that come
Right.
across
And
with
if
that,
we
you
are
know?
horrible, like the movie shows, then should we even be that? We
Right.
probably shouldn't,
Right.
And
It's a
then
power that we don't deserve.
right. And then the children that we are going to be making are not going to be good for overall humanity anyway. So it sort
That's
of
true.
defeats the entire argument.
That's true. I mean, it goes back in my mind with like, like you were saying in the beginning of this discussion, technology is neither good or bad. It's just how you use it. So in
Right.
whose hands is this technology placed? And that's where if I, I do have faith that there are a lot of good parts of humanity and that there are systems we can create where a technology like that can be handled in a way that is benefits society
Right.
versus not. But it also could very easily fall into the hands of
Yeah.
these systems and these controls where no, this is all just about taking away everyone's job, funneling more money up to the top of the richest people get richer and the poor people get even poorer, and they're not even necessary anymore. We can just
Yeah.
let them all die off because we don't need to exploit them for their labor. We can just use these AIs, or like using AIs to do creative things, which I think is way a bridge too far. I mean, AIs
Yeah.
can't be creative. The whole definition of creativity is come up with something no one else has done. And
Yeah.
AIs have to have something to think back on. So I think it just
Yeah.
depends, like you were saying, on who controls it. And that's where, this movie, I think, postulates a lot of different, good and bad sides of that, whether they have their own free will or whether America is controlling it. Because when America did, that's when the nuke went off in LA by
Hmm.
mistake because the humans made an error in the code. That's a really good point. But yeah, the
Yeah.
movie doesn't answer the question, but like you said, I don't think we have answers to these questions yet
Yeah.
because all these things are really like there were theories back when, they were making Terminator and Matrix. There were theories, and now it's becoming so we can see this future. It's like
Right.
we're close
You
to it
can
now. So
visualize it.
exactly, like we have these tools that we can see evolving into something like the Matrix or Skynet. They're not science fiction anymore. And it's like,
Mm.
how do we now wrestle with these questions? Which I do think the movie came apart, I don't think they planned it like this, but at the right time to be asking these questions because it is actually a future we could see as opposed to a future we can only imagine.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, Karan, now it's time for your number two. What do you have for us?
From AI land, we are going to the lands of past lives. So yeah, this was my number two movie that was actually released in the year, Past Lives, directed by Celine Song, starring Greta Lee, Tae Yu, and John McGarrow. Quick log line. Nora and Haesung, two deeply connected childhood friends, are wrested apart after Nora's family immigrates from South Korea. 20 years later, they are reunited for one fateful week as they confront notions of love and destiny. I'll be upfront in saying I have no, long lost love from, India or other places that I grew up in who, I've stayed in touch with, who's haunted me in some way and that I actually met and what have you, and was sitting there, with my current partner at a bar. That's not what has happened in my life. But there's something about this movie and just the notion of people who were born elsewhere, grew up elsewhere, immigrated elsewhere. There's always a piece of that other place that
Hmm.
you call home that always stays with you and it haunts you in some form or the other.
Uh-huh.
And this year was the year after a long time, after 5 years, I actually went back to India because of COVID and life
Hmm.
changes and such. I just didn't have a chance to do that. And it was such a beautiful time to just be back and connect not just with family, but just be there, look at the
Hmm.
streets and the chaos of Delhi. And it was the rainy monsoon season. Just look at the rain from my parents' home's balcony, something that I'm very familiar with, but yet
Hmm.
it feels new and different. You kind of feel it and connect with it at a cellular level, if you will, but yet it's all different. You don't really belong here, but it still is a big part of who you are. And that's what this movie, I think, evoked in me.
Mm.
It is, of course, Haesung, which is Greta Lee's childhood friend, and that feeling of what this could have been and that long lost love. Like to me, the Haesung is like a physical incarnation of South Korea and home
Hmm.
and growing up over there and those familiar smells and colors. And when you make a left around this turn, what might be there. even though everything else on that turn has totally changed. Those feelings
Hmm.
and those memories will always be with you. And I think that's kind of what this movie captures, of that question of, what could life have been? And then it kind of comes to a very beautiful conclusion, is that it doesn't have to be either or. You can cherish what you grew up with, whether it's a person or those smells or those colors, and also have a new life in this new place with the new people who are in your life and love you. And to me, that's the perfect balance, right? That you're able to somehow weave all of that. Easier said than done, of course,
Sure.
but it was a good reminder that that can be done. And I feel quite lucky that for the most part I've been able to do that, and hopefully I, you know keep doing it as I grow older. So yeah, that's what this movie evoked, and we can talk about the movie as we go further. But yeah, what did you think
Yeah,
of the movie?
I didn't see the movie until
Yeah.
the podcast. I'd heard a lot about it and got a lot of really like rave reviews and definitely went into it expecting to really like it because at least on a surface level, I think what you just talked about is the themes of the film, which I think work really really well in terms of being an immigrant and having, she's with an American husband. So it's like how is she balancing her old world, who she used to be and growing up in Korea versus her new life that she chose in America with a, white husband. But the other plot is more like the surface level plot, which is just this romance thing about, a kid who had a childhood crush and now he's trying to kind of enact that. And, as we've talked about in the podcast, there are a lot of movies that sort of unrequited love, movies that I tend to really resonate with me. We talked about Once and the Before trilogy on this podcast before. In the Mood for Love is another one of my favorites, Brief Encounter, which you talked about. And I thought this movie would fit into that wheelhouse and be like, okay, well, I'm like sort of set up to like this movie. And I don't know, I didn't connect with the romance stuff, did not work at all for me. I thought the guy was kind of pathetic, and I'm like, get over yourself. Like, this is someone you met when you were 9. Like, come on, have a life. Like, what are you doing? Like, I didn't feel sorry for him. Like, the romance piece really didn't work for me. It kind of just fell flat. But that second layer that you mentioned about sort of being, I don't say like caught between two worlds, she chose to leave. And well, I guess she didn't. Her parents did, but
Right.
she was taken away from this homeland, and like how is she wrestling with that and all the things that I have no experience with this whatsoever. I was born in the U.S. I grew up in the U.S. I don't have that immigrant experience, but I imagine it's a lot like this of like, well, who am I? Like, how much of the Korea do I want to hold on to, or the old country? How much do I want to hold on to versus envelop this new life? And there's a lot of lines in this of like, oh, I kind of don't really talk, Korean anymore. Oh, I talk it to, he mentions to her, your Korean kind of sucks now. She's like, yeah, well, I never really speak it anymore.
Yeah.
And just I think it just immediately comes back to her. Like he represents like that memory of this old life and that she don't wants to cherish parts of it, but she knows it can't be her future. She chose her future with this, her American white husband. I think those things in the movie were beautiful and things that I thought really worked for me. But the romance piece, I was just kind of like, I don't know, I was expecting to be devastated at the end or care about them being together. And I was like, no, this guy's is so sad. Like, get over yourself, dude. Like, find somebody else. Like, why are you still hung up on someone you knew when you were 9? And just it just I don't know, that didn't work for me. But I thought the rest of the movie and her acting especially, I thought was fantastic of the main woman.
Yeah. I mean, the critique that you have, I sort of feel like that is the point of the
Right.
movie,
Yeah.
that I
Right.
don't
Right.
I don't think he actually loves her. I think he's in this kind of arrested development kind of place. And you see that, right? Like his life with his friends, and he hasn't really matured
Right.
into anything more.
Hmm.
She's become this amazing kind of, and they always have this running joke because Greta's character is always planning what next big thing that I want to do, right,
Right.
in
Right.
life.
Right.
And he has
Achieve. Yeah.
really achieved, like he has no ambition per se, and he's done okay, and he's been with a girlfriend and didn't really go anywhere and such. So to me, this is not love. This is more like, oh, just a curiosity, number one, and B, what
Hmm.
else do I have going on? Let's sort of pursue this and let's figure it out. And there's a thing of just visiting the US as part of it too. I don't think it's love. It's not unrequited love at
Oh, I
all.
know it's not. Yeah, no, and I'm
So
not
it's
saying.
just a different story. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I'm not criticizing the movie for that. I just
Yeah.
thought that that's what it was, and I was like,
Right. Yeah.
oh,
It's just
well, this
not.
is not at all what this is.
No.
It's about something completely different. Like the past life was this memory that he had of her when maybe he was happy and had his first crush, and he just can't get over that. Like his past life is holding him back, whereas I think she's able to find that right balance of her past life of her being a Korean. She's able to weave that into her present and then also her future. And I think it shows a maturity that he just doesn't. I think the contrast
Yeah.
between those two characters is how the movie sort of hits it
Yeah.
at that theme. Like it's really not at all about, like you said, a love. It's not a love story. It's
Not a
not
love
about
story.
it's not about that. Well, unless with the husband, I guess.
With the new
It is.
husband, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
which was weird. That scene was very awkward. I also didn't like that scene at the bar. I thought it was unfair to this guy and he should have put his
I
foot down
know.
more. Like that was just something about that just didn't work for me. I was too embarrassed for him.
I know.
It was
But
just
that's the
yeah.
point of the movie
Oh,
too.
I understand that.
And
Yeah.
that's why it's so beautiful. Like that whole opening shot is so amazing of like, oh, who are these people? What is going on over
That
here?
was
And
great. Mhm.
yeah, and I do feel for him. Like maybe he should put his foot down more, or maybe Greta's character should be a little bit more thoughtful that okay, you brought him together, but you're just talking to this guy in Korean, a language that your husband doesn't even speak for
Mhm.
most of it.
Mhm.
And that's kind of rude in a way. But at the same time, it's also kind of beautiful that her husband has the security and safety feeling with her to let her do this while he's there, and the
Right,
fact
right.
that she also feels this sense of security in him that she can do this in front of him, that there's no sneaking around, there's no
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
because this conversation could have happened when they were walking around in New York, but they didn't. they
Right.
they have this conversation together. And in some ways, feeling and expression and emotions kind of transcend language. Like John Magaro knows exactly what is going on over here, I think, even though
Yeah,
he
yeah.
doesn't speak the language. So yeah, the movie is and yeah, very beautiful in that sense, but I agree with you. I was sort of, yeah, it unsettled me for sure. And it
Yeah.
it brings up questions that, oh, if I were in these shoes, what would I do?
Right,
Of
right,
all
right.
of these three people's shoes. That's the other brilliant thing about the screenplay. I think the movie puts you in the shoes of all three of its lead characters and
Right.
asks that, what would you do?
Right, right, and they each deal with. I mean, I think the husband, the American white husband,
Yeah.
the past life he's dealing with is his wife's past life that he can never be a part of, and which is really true for anyone, whether you're
Mm-hmm.
involved with an immigrant or someone from a different culture or not. Like so
Right.
everyone has a past that you were not in. When you
Right.
join with that person, there is a past, and it's like how do you deal with that? I think that is what he's going through, but just in an extreme standpoint, because he never be a part of any of it because of the culture gap there, and that I think is a very interesting. Like he's a very interesting character too. And even
Yeah.
though he's not the lead, I mean, they're definitely it's the two Koreans are the two leads, but they give the husband a very sort of strong arc and interesting like situations he's put in and how he deals again with dating and being with someone who's from another culture who speaks a different language, like all those things. I think the movie subtly, without kind of getting into it too much, like kind of lays that in there, which I think is cool. Like that part of the movie, I really like. I think I just got too distracted by the fact that I thought this was a romance movie, and
An
I think that piece
expectation
doesn't
sort of thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
that piece doesn't really work very well. And I guess the whole movie, I was waiting for that to like hit me and it never did. And then at the final end, I was like, oh, maybe this is about like past lives, don't not in a romantic way, but in just
Yeah.
a yeah, like in the culture and what immigrant past is like. So yeah, I think if I see it again, which I might at
I
some
was
point, I think
just going to say,
it'll
yeah.
be I'll feel better about the movie, which at this I thought it was fine. Like I wouldn't recommend people run out to see it. Like I was like, this is okay. That's a fine movie. Like, it was fine. But maybe I need to see it again now that I sort of realized towards the end of what this was, and not what I thought and hoping, I guess, the movie
Yeah.
was about.
Yeah. Now I would recommend that to you, and I would recommend
Hmm.
this movie to anybody, because I think it's not even about immigration. I think we all have past lives, no matter where we were. And,
Hmm.
this is a huge country that we live in. If you lived in, a town, I don't know, in California, and now you move to New York, you have a totally different life. You knew people over there that you grew up with. Maybe you had someone you fell in love with, and maybe they are hung up on you, maybe you are hung up on them, or all these questions of what could life have been if I just stayed, you know?
Hmm.
Everybody's leaving their hometowns to go somewhere or the other, right? So that's why
Hmm.
to me this movie is actually very universal. It doesn't have to be about immigration or different cultures, because the culture is the culture of the place that you were born in. And if you
Hmm.
left that place, you're in a different culture, in my
Right,
mind.
that's true. No,
You
yeah,
know?
no, the past lives are, like I was saying, just your past, and everyone has a past.
Right.
That, especially when you're in a relationship, you can't go back in that past and be with that person then, but it's how you wrestle with that and integrate that
Yeah.
into the relationship in the present moving forward, which they they do a good job of showing how the maturity of that, her and her husband's relationship, even though again I just felt uncomfortable for him
I
even
know.
though yes, he wasn't necessarily, I mean he was uncomfortable, but there was a sense of trust there. It wasn't like
Yeah.
you said, they weren't sneaking around. He knew what was going on. Yeah, I do. I should see this again now that sort of have better expectations of what the movie's actually about, because these themes are not usually captured in a lot of different films. They don't deal with
No.
this.
Yeah.
Like Chasing Amy is probably the only other movie I can think of that has this whole theme about like a past and how it works into a relationship and can and can't work and that kind of thing. But no,
Yeah.
this I enjoyed it. I'm glad I did see
I'm
it.
glad. Yeah. And I would say, a movie like this, which is a smaller story, an intimate story, can be done in so many different ways. But I love that this movie is so cinematic. It's
Hmm.
just so beautifully captured. When you mentioned In the Mood for Love, it sort of has a lot of, I think, homages, I think, to that style of kind
Yeah.
of lyrical and cinematic. And New York, I mean, I hate to say New York is a character in the movie, but it just is. And I actually watched this movie in New York while I was visiting.
Oh, cool.
And I stepped out of the theater, it was raining, and I called my boyfriend. I was kind of teary-eyed. And it sort of has that kind of, now this movie has that moment attached
Oh, that's
to me,
cool.
like a new memory, on
Yeah.
top of it. I'm not from here either. I'm not even from New York. I don't even live there. I just happen to be there. So it's like kind of beautiful, right? That this movie talks about people and places and moving around and such, which just is gonna it's something that we'll keep doing, right? And
Hmm.
each of those places, whether for a long time or a short time, have some other significance for you, and that stays with you.
Hmm.
And now this movie has this memory attached to it because of that. But yeah, very cinematic, beautifully written. In my mind, one of the best movies of the year, which is
Oh, wow.
already a great year of movies.
Well, then maybe I should definitely sing it. 'Cause I would. I liked it, but I wouldn't put it on like a top 10 of
Yeah.
2023. So I think I need to take
I
another
mean, it's an
pass at it.
expectation thing. I also watched in the theater, which,
Ah,
not to kind of, go into our actual top
makes a
movies of the
difference.
year.
Yeah.
I just keep coming back to that again and again. Like, these movies just have to be seen in the theater in a dark room with your phones off. Like,
Yep.
this is not a movie to casually just put up, on your device. It's just not is.
No,
Not
I
it.
mean, yeah, real movies are made for a theater,
Yeah.
and not
Yeah.
just in scope and size, but just with attention that they expect you to have and focus
Yeah.
and all these things. It's not like a Ant-Man 4 or whatever, where you can kind of pay attention for 10 minutes and know what's going on and then like,
Yeah.
check Twitter again and then go back 10 minutes later. This is
Yeah.
not, all the best movies aren't, you
Yeah.
have to dedicate
Exactly.
time to them. But yeah, thanks for putting this on the list.
All right. What is your next?
So my number two film that shaped my 2023 is Analyze This from 1999. This is a film directed by Harold Ramis, starring Robert De Niro, Billy Crystal, and Lisa Kudrow. The plot summary: a comedy about a psychiatrist whose number one patient is an insecure mob boss. So I put this movie on the list for me because this year in 2023 was the year that I started individual therapy for the first time. I'd never done it before. And I've found it super helpful, super enjoyable, very therapeutic, no pun intended. And this movie was the first movie that I was remembered, at least growing up, was a movie that was about therapy. And then going back and watching it after having, done some individual therapy, I realized that actually this is a really good encapsulation of how therapy can help you, how it's really a focus on communication. So Robert De Niro is the mob boss, and he doesn't really communicate as well to his mob family, but then also to other mob families. Like he doesn't want to have a meeting. He's trying to avoid talking to these other mobsters. And definitely communication is, with oneself and also with other humans is a big part of therapy and something that therapy's helped me a lot with that. And the other piece too is just going back and looking at your past and things from your childhood where moments that you might not have thought are very impactful, but they end up being, like in this film, Robert De Niro, you realize over the course of the film that a major moment in his life was seeing his dad get killed at a restaurant, like in front of him. And it's not something that he likes to ever talk about or ever address. But then when Billy Crystal, who's the therapist, kind of makes him come to terms with that, it really helps him, find the emotion inside of him, helps him with his anxiety and tension and all the issues he has at the beginning of the movie. And there's a funny slash, pretty moving scene, I think, where Robert De Niro is sitting in a hotel room, and this is after he sort of told Billy Crystal about his father, and they realize this is a major incident in his life that he needs to address. And he's seeing a commercial on TV for like insurance, and it's like a father and son kind of theme in the commercial, and he just starts crying. Because yes, it is played for laughs a little bit, but that is just something that when you really are in touch with your emotions, and there's now a trigger that you have around, in this example, like fathers and sons, it is therapeutic to just cry and really feel that, even though it is something as stupid as a insurance commercial. But I was surprised going back and watching this of how much actually yes, it is a comedy, and a lot of this is played for laughs, and some of it is a silly, like, oh, what do your dreams mean thing, which is not what at least my experience in therapy has been like. But a lot of the things that I've taken away so far from my experience with my therapist is actually really captured in this movie in a way that I think is a good representation of why, whether you're a mob boss or not, I think therapy is something that helps people and should help people. So pause there. And yeah, what are your thoughts on Analyze This? If first time you've seen it, what do you think?
I'd never seen it, obviously know of it. But yeah, I agree with the resonance with the themes of therapy. And I agree with you as well. Very powerful, very useful. Everybody should do it in my mind. So those themes definitely come across. Watching the movie the first time now sort of does, to me at least, felt like this movie is kind of a slice of its time.
Oh yeah, it's late 90s, like for
it's
sure.
Late 90s. It felt kind of comical, maybe not in a good way in my mind, to see Robert De Niro make those faces, which have kind of now become memes.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of the what do you call it? Like, the face that he made.
Like the mob face kind of. I know what you're trying to, like when he mugs, he does a little mugging.
Right, mugging and kind of the upside down smile, if you will.
Yeah,
that's what I associate with Robert De Niro. I had no idea that this started with this movie. So it kind of felt kind of memeified in that sense. And then just the humor of it. I mean, these are obviously amazing actors, we know that, but the central punchline being that, oh, this is a mob boss who should not be engaging in something like therapy. Like that is the central joke, if you will, of the movie.
Oh yeah. That is the log line of it.
That is the log line. That doesn't sort of really feel funny. It's interesting, but it doesn't feel funny only because we are watching this now. But I kept telling myself that just imagine if you were watching this movie in the 90s. This is Robert De Niro, who's done so many, mob movies. For him to do a mob movie where he's crying and wants to seek help and get better, that has a lot of weight,
Yeah, this was his right. I mean, we talked about Meet the Parents on a past episode, but this was predates that, and this was really his moment of like, I'm gonna do comedy and make fun of myself. I mean, you mentioned all the faces. I think he's overly exaggerating those in this film because he's playing off of all these past roles that he's played, like Casino and Goodfellas and The Godfather and all these things where he's played a gangster. And I guess it is hard to think back. I mean, because I saw this in the theaters when it first came out in '99, and it was a big, like, this was like a huge hit at the time.
I bet.
And Billy Crystal was one of the big comedy stars in the '90s, and I hadn't seen at that point all the Bob De Niro gangster films, but I knew him. Oh, he's like the mobster guy, so it was even funny to see him play it up for laughs. Even though there are parts of this movie too where like you actually are like, wow, this guy could kill you. Like he does a very good job of not making it too much of a parody of himself, which maybe he might do in later, later roles when I think he went too far into the comedy and stuff and it didn't really work for me. But this is that perfect balance of, okay, like he's playing his characters for laughs, but there are several scenes in that where like he's pulling people aside and like having conversations like, oh yeah, no, he could get this guy killed like immediately. And you kind of believe it like you would in, Goodfellas or Casino or something. But I mean, it is a high concept comedy, right? A mobster in therapy. Like, sounds like you'd be a tough create. If I pitched that to you, as an exec, you'd be like, not funny. Next. What else you got? You got anything else? Like that wouldn't work in the room, do you?
The concept is very funny. I just think the treatment of the movie is dated, obviously, because it's
Right,
from a
right.
different time,
Yeah.
and it's leads playing off of their life history and what they've done in that time is also dated,
Hmm.
But if this
Hmm.
movie were made now with somebody who we know as kind of a mob person or a movie star, oh, we don't have movie stars now, so
We
there's that.
don't, yeah.
I don't know who we would cast.
We also don't have
Sadly.
comedies anymore either, so especially
Also
not high
that,
concept
sorry.
ones.
Yeah.
So you're right.
Yeah.
This movie is incredibly dated in a lot of different ways. And actually, I hadn't seen it in probably 20 years. And it was interesting. It's an R-rated, adult comedy essentially, but the humor is very like silly
Very
and
silly.
very
Yeah.
light and like breezy and something you would expect in like a PG movie almost. But yeah, obviously it's not. It's R-rated sort of adult comedy. But it was interesting going back and thinking like, oh, there was like a market for this back then, right? Where
Yeah.
adults would go out and see like a movie with like Bobby De Niro and Billy Crystal, who was also a huge,
Oh,
again,
I'm
comedian at the
sure people
time,
were like
and
laughing
eating
their
this up.
hats
Yeah.
off.
Like, oh, he shot a pillow, and like, oh, like, this stuff that is the Lisa Kudrow stuff, which she's great in this movie too, as like the
Yeah.
straight woman. But a lot of things in this that are like so gaggy, but that was just the time. And my favorite, I think the funniest moment in the movie is when Billy Crystal like tries to impersonate like a mob boss and he's going into
Oh
like the
yeah.
family meeting. Like that is
That
hilarious,
was a
but
great scene actually.
silly, but very silly to your
Yeah.
point. Like it's definitely a type of comedy that we don't see anymore, though. Again, like I said, we
Yeah.
don't really see any comedies anymore, sadly, on
Yeah.
the big
Yeah.
screen.
That
Um,
scene actually really worked for me. Yeah, I think it's just the mimification and the fact that I'm
yeah.
watching this movie for the first time now, right? Like if I had
Oh, totally.
watched
Right, right,
this
right.
previously, I would probably feel differently.
Yeah.
The other thing that I was also wrestling with a little bit, and I guess maybe because Billy Crystal's character knows that De Niro is dangerous, but the fact that he just keeps leaving her and other things to take care of whatever is happening with him. I'm
Yeah.
like, you're a grown man. You have an own practice. Like, act like one. This is like, it became too much that it
Yeah.
was. And I know it's high concept is supposed to be funny, right? That, oh, whenever he's about to do something important, the henchmen are there. Which,
Right.
by the way, all the character actors who are De Niro's henchmen, amazing. I loved all of those guys. They're
Yeah.
so good.
Yeah.
They're
Classic
so good.
mob character actors. Again, get to
Yeah.
play comedy, right? They get to
Yeah,
play
they are so
things to
good,
laugh.
but the
Yeah.
fact that Billy would always go for it, that to me felt a little bit too much at
Yeah,
times.
yeah, yeah. It's this, it's a script's got to do what it's got to do. But
Right.
I totally hear in that. But it was again, I was actually surprised how I still found the movie. Again, I hadn't seen it in 20 years. Still very funny. Like I laughed at a lot of the gags, and it did feel very, like you said, very 90s and dated. But I mean, there was a nostalgia I think that I can tap into that, someone who's seen it for the first time, I think that's not something you would have for like, oh yeah, I remember when movies used to be like this, and
Yeah,
it's I still think Meet the Parents and his performance in that is actually better, but
I
seeing
agree.
this as a transition between like where he is again making fun of himself, but not to a goofy standpoint, his persona, I mean, not himself, but his persona. I think he just does he's a fantastic actor.
Of
And
course. It's De Niro.
great actors can do comedy and drama, and I think he's definitely one of
Exactly.
those guys. So it was fun to kind of go back and see that side of him too.
Yeah, I found it okay funny. I wasn't sort of laughing out loud, but I did find it charming.
Yeah, yeah, that's a
And
good
it's
word
fun to
for it.
see them at they're not old enough yet because when I think of Robert De Niro in comedies, I somehow imagine a much older De Niro. Like he looks really
Oh,
good in this movie
he looks
actually,
great.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and that's nice to see. Billy looks good, and then also just a reminder of like that they spend money on comedies. Like this movie is well made,
Hmm.
and all these locations, and they go to where Florida. Where did they
Yeah,
go?
Florida.
Yeah,
Yeah, they go to
like all
Florida.
of that is like they're actually there. Like all of that matters, of course, because we
Hmm.
don't now. To your point, we don't make comedies, and if we do, they're sort of green screeny and nobody ever goes anywhere, which
Right.
that's my number one complaint with movies. Well, actually number two, that I've voiced on this podcast several times, that go to the real place if you can.
I totally go to it would be probably shot in like Toronto or Vancouver, and the whole thing would double for like New York and then double for Philly, or like they do a lot of
I
that
would
stuff.
even
It was
take
made
that
today.
as opposed to a CGI
Oh,
background
that's what
movie.
you're talking about. Oh, like a backlot
I
shot on a backlot in Atlanta kind of thing.
right.
But no, I'm glad you saw it. I
Me
guess. I
too.
mean, it is, it's a classic part of De Niro's filmography for sure, a big turning point
Definitely.
for him. And I think Billy Crystal's sort of last hit and where he had real resonance in the culture was really this. And there was a sequel analyzed that was really bad.
Mm.
it's one of those sequels where they basically do the same movie again. And the
Oh.
jokes are like they're all the same. Like we already saw this. It was so fresh and new in the first
Mm,
one, and this is just sort of like, okay, what's
mm.
what's what's going on here? Okay, so now we are to our number ones. These are going to be our number one movies that shaped our 2023. What do you got for us, Karan? Why don't you start us off?
All right. So this was a hard one. And to be honest, maybe I should save this for the last, but I'll just say that each of my movies, I could put them on any slot, honestly,
Hmm.
because they're all very resonant. But, I just put this one because I thought about it more since I watched it. So my number one movie that shaped my 2023 is The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp from 1943, directed by Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger, starring Roger Livesley, am I saying that right? Deborah Kerr, Anton Walbrook. Quick logline from the Boer War through World War II, a soldier rises to the ranks in the British military. So I put this on my list. I mean, I obviously know of Powell and Pressburger, and I've seen a couple of their movies, not all of it. And it's a big Scorsese year with Flower Moon coming out this year, and I've heard Scorsese talk about this movie a lot. So I just was like, oh, it'll be fun to check this movie out. And I just was completely blown away by the movie. And of course, we'll get into the technical craft of it and such, which, Paul Pressburgers are masters of always. But
Hmm.
from a thematic resonance standpoint, I don't know, there's something about just watching a person just grow old in their life. Maybe this again goes back to me entering the 40s decade. There's something about that of just, life and loves and friendships and all of it that you endure and deal with and how you deal with that. Like there's something very poignant about that. But the central thing that really grabbed me about this movie was the friendship between the main lead character and the German character.
Hmm.
And in a time, especially where there's so much conflict that we are living through in multiple parts of the world right now, there's something, I don't know, very beautiful and human about these two guys, a British soldier and a German soldier on opposite sides of the war, yet having this friendship which is not without its low points or
Hmm.
judgment towards each other, but ultimately that's what stands the test of time through all these conflicts. And I don't know, it kind of underlined to me that wars and all these things can keep happening, and there's I'm not saying there's nothing at stake, that there is, but what rises up top is the humanity and the human connection. And that can be true no matter which side you're at. And so I don't know, for those reasons as well, this movie felt very resonant with all the
Hmm.
conflict that's kind of going around. But other than that, obviously this movie is just beautifully made and you're totally sucked into it. It's a long movie, but you don't, I never felt it. I've seen it twice this year already,
Hmm.
and I was totally sucked into it. But yeah, I know you had not watched this movie before, but
No, yeah,
yeah,
I had
what did
not
you
seen
think?
it. Yeah, it had always been because I love a lot of Powell and Pressburger's other films, Black Narcissus, Red Shoes, and
Hmm.
I had heard about this all the time. It's like a weird title. It was long.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know. At some point I want to watch this. So I'm really glad I was forced to for this podcast, and I thought it was just um incredible, like masterpiece. Like you're watching this, you're like, this is cinema, not to sound too corny or anything like that. I absolutely loved it. I thought actually though it was interesting. For about 20 minutes, I was like, I don't like this. Like, what is this movie? It's weird. I was totally not into it whatsoever. I was like, okay, great. This is gonna be a slog now. Because it starts off where you don't first of all, there is no Colonel Blimp in the movie. That's
No.
not a character at all, which was throwing me. I was like, where's Colonel Blimp coming in? What's going on? Where is he? And it starts off with this really, it's set in the present day, like World War II. It's the present day when the movie was made in like 42 or whatever. And this, it's not even the main characters. These soldiers kind of like it's sort of like a madcap comedy kind of. The
Right.
humor's not working for me. I'm like, the soundtrack's kind of annoying. I'm like, I don't like this. And it took about 20 minutes for it to then to do the flashback into the past, and then the movie starts really getting going. And then it opens up, and then I understand what the beginning was supposed to be
Right.
for, and it works. And I'm like, okay, now I get this. And yeah, by the end of the movie, I'm like, this is one of the best movies ever made, hands down. Like I will be watching this every year, like for years to come. I absolutely loved
I'm
it. I
so
thought,
glad to hear that.
yeah, I mean, from a technical standpoint, obviously, like you said, incredible. Some of the like Citizen Kane level scene transitions and
Mm-hmm.
passage of time stuff that I was like, this is incredible. There's a opening scene when the main character as an old man kind of falls into a pool in a Turkish bath, and the camera
Oh,
pans to like over him, like kind of like getting in a fight with this young commander over back into the backside of the pool, and then he comes out of the pool as a young man, all one shot, and now it's 40 years ago. As and that just a brilliant, again, Citizen Kane level like transition there, just incredible. And the passage of time showing the game going up against the wall. So there's scenes in the movie like have to like speed through like 10 years of his life, and they show his game room. Game meaning like animals, not like
mm-hmm.
Parcheesi, and you'll see like busts of animals appearing on the
Right.
wall as you see him like working through emotions. That's sort of what it implies. Hard times in his life, he goes out and kills animals, and then you see them gradually kind of going up on the wall to show the passage of time. Just brilliant, brilliant stuff for technical level. But I just thought the theme was really powerful around he's just some this old school idea of what British manners and war is a game, and yeah, it's bad, but there's still rules. There has to be rules. You got to follow the rules, and that he's just a man out of his time by the end of the movie, where like you can't. There are no rules in war, really, and I think he kind of learns that, even though he refuses to give up on that worldview. He just accepts like it's his time has passed at the end when he salutes sort of the young soldiers who are in
Mm-hmm.
World War II, because as that German commander who was his friend is like, look, the Nazis are not. You can't play patty cakes with them. They will break
Yeah.
all the rules, and if you try to play by the rules, you will lose. And it's
Yeah.
more important that we beat the Nazis, even if we're sinking down to quote unquote their level. Like war is war. It is hell. So to try to pretend that it's not, like it's some sort of, contest, but like a parlor game between like, the high society of these countries it never was that, even though
Yeah.
he thought it was. But that I think is a message that is really resonant too. I think even today of like, no, like there, no, all's fair in love and war. That is an expression that is true, because those are the two most important things, love and death. And
Right.
there's no such thing as cheating in war. You have to win,
Yeah.
especially when you're up against enemies like the Nazis, which I think this movie did a brilliant job of just showing how awful like they
Yeah.
were and how important it was to defeat them at all costs, no matter what. And we can't
Yeah.
kind of pussyfoot around it, like what
Yeah.
Colonel Blimp wanted to do, or not Colonel, like Colonel Candy
Candy.
wanted
Yeah.
to do. He thought that this was all just like a game where we could
Yeah.
just fight for a while and then we'll be friends again and it's fine. It's like, no, it's not. And I think that message, I think to me was really, really powerful and kind of turned a lot of like what it means to be British, I think, on its head and questioned a lot of these things too, which I thought was just amazing and really resonant.
Yeah. But the beauty of it is that though that is true, the reason he ends up being friends with the German guy is because of that view that he has, So
Yeah,
there are
right, right,
kind of
right.
contradictory points of views, and maybe it's a balance that you have to win no matter what, but at the same time you can also view the humanity of the people on the other side, or try to.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I guess you could look at it that way. I mean, I think it is complicated too in the sense of, I mean, there was even they bring this up. It's like, well, if we fight as bad as the Nazis, are we then the Nazis ourselves?
Right.
Right. And yeah, there is the danger of that. But at the same time, there is good and evil, or
Right.
there's at
You
least
have
evil. There is
there
at
at
least
least
evil.
evil.
And you got to, you can't let evil have any like no
No.
quarter, right? And I
Yeah.
think that was what the German who left. I mean, I love that scene too when he is,
When he comes
basically a
back.
refugee and he's talking
Yeah.
to the British guy, like, oh, let me in
Yeah.
this country. I'm not a spy. Like, I want to live here.
Right.
Look at what the Nazis did to the country that I
Right.
love. Like, he loves Germany, and that's why he has to leave because the Nazis are that terrible. I thought that whole monologue
It's
was just
amazing,
so
right?
powerful, powerfully
Yeah,
delivered, incredible themes.
totally. And that's what I mean by the humanity, right? Like you could be on a different side by country, but it really comes more to what do you believe in? What are your
Right.
values? And
Exactly.
you can be
Exactly.
seen, for that. You talked about the passage of time. Like that's the other thing. Like I felt similarly when the movie started the first time when I watched, like, what is happening? I don't know if I fully
Yeah.
understand.
Mm-hmm.
But that's by the end of the movie, that's the genius of it, that nothing is spelled out to you.
Mm-hmm.
It's just these motifs and emotions that kind of carry you through somebody's life, because that's how life would be. You're not going to get cards at the beginning that, oh, we are in this year now. It's
Right.
just not how life works. And then
Mm-hmm.
To top that, the other clever trick of the movie is using Deborah Kerr
Yes.
as this constant throughout all these times and different incarnations. I've never seen that before.
Hmm.
Nor, I mean, there are movies like Cloud Atlas and such where the same people play different characters over space and time, but it's not that here. It's just one person. It's not like everybody is showing up in different times. It's just her,
Right.
which is just so, again, moving and beautiful and kind of poignant that this guy who loved her just sees her, perhaps. That could be one interpretation. Or the literal one is that there are people who look like her, which I don't think is the
No.
point.
Right. Right.
But
No, they're
I
trying to
think
make a statement with that.
yeah,
Yeah.
the point is of just passage of time and just that the people who you are drawn to and love, they kind of stay with you in some form or the other. They could be a lover, they could be a lover's sister, they could be somebody who ends up working for you,
Hmm.
all sorts of things, right? Or somebody you end up marrying. And I just think that's just such a beautiful thing and quite the trick, because when you see her again and again, it takes a minute to sort of say, oh, is it the same person or is it
Right.
different? Especially the sister. When she shows up, I think they're watching an opera or some performance or
Hmm.
something, and it's like, wait, it's her? Is it her? Is it somebody else? It's just so crazy. But again, I love that like in all their movies, they trust the audience that they'll figure it out. They'll follow along.
Right.
Nothing is spelled out, nothing is sort of called out, and you just live with these people.
Right, right. Yeah, for me the second like the love portion of this film where he's in love with Deborah Carr, but then
Yeah.
his friend is actually confesses the love first, so he gives her up and lets his, the German friend marry the love of his life apparently, and that's why he kind of sees her again.
Yeah.
I think also goes back to the same theme of like there are no honor or there is no rules in love and war, right?
Yeah.
And he should have said, no, sorry, like I'm in love with her. Like him giving her up was again him not achieving what he should have gotten or wanted out of his life. In the same way that with his military piece, he's pretending that there were these codes of honor in all these wars he was fighting, even though historically, like, was not the case. And I think the love piece of it also shows he's like cares more about the honor and the rules than he does even his own happiness. And he's losing out on not only then his military career at the end because he's a guy who cannot fight the real war that they need, but also he's not with the woman that he loves and he's trying to find these replacements for her. And they never even had a relationship to see. I mean, there's this great line where the German friend says something about, yeah, you only knew her as an idea, but I actually lived with
Right.
her. Like I know what she was like as a real person. So you might think that your ex-wife reminded you of her, but you never actually really knew her, which is true. He never really did. He just fell in love with her in that one time in the hospital and then really never saw her again, actually, I think is what the film's implying
No,
because
never saw her.
never saw her again. So it's just kind of, I think he's a sort of a sad character in a way that he cares so much about these, again, rules that he's not living the life that he should be living. And he's lying to himself and thinking that the British weren't like doing these horrible things like in these wars where he's claiming, oh, we follow the rules and the enemy doesn't. That's why we always win. I mean, that wasn't true. I mean, Germans gassed people in World War One, yes, but so did the British. And they
Right.
also killed civilians. And in there's a whole sequence in the beginning of the movie where he goes to Germany to fight against some propaganda. He calls it propaganda. Oh, we didn't kill civilians in South Africa, the Boer Wars. Oh, we were all fine. It
Mm,
was that. And actually, no, the British basically
yeah.
invented the concentration camp in that war and put all those Boers in concentration camps and were
Yeah.
killing civilians. I mean, that was all known. But for him, he had to believe in this, like, oh, it's all about the rules. Which even I noticed at the end of the movie when they show the credits over this tapestry, which they showed at the
Hmm.
beginning of the movie too, but I didn't
Hmm.
really put two and two together, that he's sort of this idealized version of what
Right.
British people think they are. And this British culture, at least, right? Oh, there's it's tapestry of this medieval. He's a knight in shining armor and this Colonel Blimp guy, but because he believes in chivalry and all these things. And actually, they never really believed in. I mean, they may believe in it, but they never acted that way, and that's fine. Like it's not like a knock on them or anything. No one does. I mean, it's war, right? But I think the movie's sort of attacking that ideal along with the love piece too, which is bringing it back to Deborah
Love
Carr's
and
piece. But
War.
yeah,
Yeah.
Love and War. I just really this movie is, I mean, deserves all the praise it gets. I think it's just an absolute like
It's
10 out
so
of 10
layered.
masterpiece. I'm embarrassed to say this is the first time I've seen it. That was this year. So I'm
None.
so glad you finally, made me watch it through this podcast.
Now I'm so glad you watched it. And I feel like I'll keep watching it again and again too, because I agree with what you're saying. At the same time, if you zoom out in his own ignorance or in his own sort of high and might, he still managed to have a pretty good life and
Hmm.
impacted a lot of people positively, the relationships that he's had and everything. So there's that too, right? Like the lies that we tell ourselves, whether of honor or what have you, are they bad or do they help us actually move forward, even though you're living, in ignorance, perhaps,
Hmm.
as long as you're not causing harm, but maybe you are, I suppose. Is that okay? So it's not so
Yeah.
black and white. And I think that the movie plays with that very well.
It does. I mean, I think what the movie's trying to say though is that it's all well and good. And again, like I think you should care about the fact that British people put Boers in concentration camps, but the movie's sort
Yeah.
of saying, well, the Nazis are different. And this was fun having
Right.
this sort of idea that war is a game and we have these little rules and that's all well and good, but this is like a real enemy and we're going to be wiped out unless you just get out of the way. And I think that's
Right.
what the movie is trying to say, which I think is there is some nuance in that too. We need sort of to believe in these maybe things are better than they are and stuff. And I think there's a
Yeah. The
lot of,
pageantry of it and
yeah,
all of that.
right,
Yeah.
right, exactly. I think there is a place for it. But what this movie
Yeah.
says is there's a time and a place, and World War II ain't
And
that
there is
time and
no
ain't
place
that
for it.
not right now. There, it
Yeah.
ain't the time, this ain't the place, which I also,
Yeah.
agree with too. So I
Yeah.
just, yeah, I'll keep watching this movie forever. I just, again, embarrassed that it took me this long to see it.
I
Incredible.
thank Marty for it. What a great year for him.
Yeah,
And thank you for putting this on my list.
yeah.
It also kind of, I was thinking about this earlier, is with both of my two picks, like this one so far, this one of A Visitor Was, and all the Greta connections and such. Like it sort of is another theme of the year that film culture has become such a big letterbox culture, right? Like all
Hmm.
people at all red carpet events are talking about their four favorites thanks to Letterboxd or
Hmm.
film references and such. Like that's the culture we are living in now, which there's a lot of good to that too. Like, I probably wouldn't have watched this movie, but
Yeah.
also another side to it that is so easy to kind of just compare whatever you're doing and refer to some great work of art and use that to kind of elevate whatever you've done,
Oh,
as opposed to let the culture actually be the decider that, oh, actually, does it belong, in the same space or no? So it's sort of interesting that
mm.
everybody now is getting up and, having their take. I mean, I guess this is what this podcast is too, right? Like we are we are not exempt from that either, but it's interesting that this is kind of a big theme of the year too, at least in the film culture world.
Yeah, but I like I can see again like the maybe people are trying to like put their movies into a pantheon that the audience decides that, not the filmmaker.
Right.
But I do like that there is this recognition of the past and these masterworks of the
Agreed.
past and bringing
Yeah,
spotlights to. I mean, if Marty I guess hadn't said that, you went to
I haven't
saw
seen
this
it.
movie this year, which means I went to see this movie this year,
Right.
and I'm
Right.
very I was just still thinking. I saw this a couple weeks ago and still thinking about it like nonstop and want to
Yeah.
find the time to watch it again. It's that good. So yeah, I think it's an important to continue to
Yeah.
look back and
Totally.
spotlight on these films because they are so important, not only to the artist, but I think it's just important to see them because they're
Exactly.
so good.
And just to life and humanity too, like how resonant these movies are, right? Like you just said, Visitor Was, we're still analyzing it now
Right.
after all this time. Like
Hmm.
that says a lot. All right. What is your number one?
So my number one film that shaped my 2023 is Roger and Me, documentary from 1989. This is written and directed by Michael Moore, and the plot summary is after General Motors closes its factory in Flint, Michigan, eliminating 35,000 jobs, filmmaker Michael Moore undertakes a quest to interview General Motors' chairman Roger B. Smith. So that's the Roger and the Roger and Me. So this movie and why I put it on the list and why this represents for sure for me the number one thing that I'll remember back on for 2023 is, this was the year of quote unquote like hot labor summer. There were several major strikes across the United States. The UPS workers stroke, the UWA, the auto workers had a big strike. And then here in Hollywood, the WGA and the SAG-AFTRA, the Writers Guild and the Actors Guild also had a strike for a long time. And I have always been, for most of my life, a huge supporter of labor movements. I mean, I didn't grow up in a labor family, like no one in my family was in a union, but actually, credit to this film and seeing this as a teenager was sort of why I started, for me, labor and solidarity is such an important moral to me that I hold really dear. But this year specifically was the first time that I actually went to a picket line and walked it in solidarity with a lot of my friends who are in WGA and SAG. So in past, I would always give money to strike funds whenever I would see them, but I never actually spent the time to put, my body on the line, so to speak, on literally on the picket line. And I did that, and it was a really rewarding and fun experience. I definitely stood by both the WGA and SAG for what they were fighting against. And I think they also, just the testament to the power of labor is they won a lot of huge things that they wanted from the studios, when the studios at the beginning of the strike said, we will never give you this. And yet they ended up winning. It just shows that that is really the only power we have left, I feel like, in this society, at least the United States, is through labor. So this movie, which I saw as a young teen and really sparked my love and admiration for Michael Moore, and then also, again, labor, I had to go back to this movie and put it on this list. I mean, it's how I view the world as, it's workers versus the owners, right? It's the workers versus the capital, people who control the capital. And this movie helped shape that worldview that over the last couple decades have been more and more been important to me. But I had to go back to this film, and I'll talk more about the film when we'll get into a discussion about that and why I still think it holds up and is very resonant. But curious if you had seen or heard of this film before.
No, neither. But yeah, I agree. Very resonant given the time that we live in, and this year specifically. I agree with you. If I were in LA, I would have supported as well. And so glad that they won and showed their power, but also the fact that studios were able to finally understand it as well. Maybe they just feared that nobody. I mean, ultimately, they sort of also fear that there'll be no product.
Well, yeah, that's the power that workers have, right, over
exactly,
the owners.
which as if I were running a company, I would be worried about that for sure. Why shouldn't you be worried about that? But the fact that they were able to meet them and they won, that's amazing. But yeah, I never watched the movie before. I have mixed feelings on Michael Moore, as discussed previously. Just, I don't know much about him personally, but just his movies and just his style. But I also appreciate a lot. Like, somebody has to be that, constant pest in your ear,
Right,
to get stuff out. So I do appreciate that. I do respect that. But watching that unfold is quite uncomfortable for sure. I think as a movie, if this movie were like half its length, it would be so much more powerful, because it just sort of goes on, because he basically, there's no editing here, which maybe to his credit, it's kind of pure in that sense. But from a making a point standpoint, the point is already made that, okay, tracking him is so difficult, and you're sort of hearing the same messages over and over and over again. Maybe that is the point, to kind of really feel the plight of the people. So I get that too, but as a pure kind of film watching experience, that at some point it started to kind of lose me, because we'd seen the same thing play out so many times. But yeah, at the same time, the fact that he was able to do this and get into all these creeks and crannies, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, I think
And that's what documentary filmmaking should be about.
Right. I mean, this was his movie, that his first movie, and what put him on the map and got him got him his entire career. And he really did change the game in how documentaries are made. Like, he weaved his own personal story into it. He has a very specific vision that it's not just, okay, I'm going to sit the camera back and sort of observe. And no, he has a very specific point that he's trying to make. It's more like a video essay in that sense. And I understand what you're saying about his hook was, I'm going to try to see the CEO of General Motors, just ask him why he did this.
Right.
And that is the through line. But that's just the way, that's like the narrative that connects together this story of, a city that was destroyed by basically the Union losing its power. So there's a great montage in the beginning where they show Flint, Michigan, where he's from. So that's the personal connection, just looking like a utopia in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
Oh, everyone has a nice house and they have a great life. They can raise all their kids. There's no, there's very little crime and poverty. I'm sure it was a little bit of nostalgia lens too. Like, it wasn't that perfect, but he was setting this perfect society up, and now showing just the decay and just downfall of this used to be a major American city, simply by the fact that, as they kind of try to make the case, at least for, is as the union, which General Motors was the main employer of the town. The unions had a lot of power in the 50s and 60s, and then over time, the unions just got too buddy with the companies and gave too many things away. And now the company, because the unions have no power, can just shut the entire plant down and get rid of all these jobs. And it just really, like, heartbreaking just to see all the workers and just the town sort of gradually crumbling like as the film goes on, and does not have a happy ending. Like
No.
the end of the movie is the town is decimated and
Yeah.
there
It's
is
very
basically no
sad.
hope.
And then, the people stories too, that there's sadness there, but there's also different people trying to cope with it differently. There's a
Yeah.
lot of delusion there. Like the
Hmm.
interviews with, the is it the homecoming queen, or
Oh,
she ends
right.
up
The
winning
Miss
Miss America.
America. Yeah. So she's
Yeah,
Miss
like
Michigan then. Yeah, she was
yeah,
Miss
exactly.
Michigan.
Like those are so telling. Like you could sort of say, oh yeah, she's kind of ignorant or self-centered. At the same time, you see the humanity of the person, right? Like
Right.
people
Yeah.
trying to patch up and kind of get on with it. At the same time, they also try to advance their own agenda because this is
Hmm.
how humans survive as well at the same
Hmm.
time, right? But then there's sadness and this kind of hollowness and hauntingness to it too. So I love all of those kind of really personal human elements because that's what you really need to tell the story of what is happening.
Right, right. Which is another skill that he has in all of his
Yeah,
documentaries, where yes, he talks about giant structural problems, but he grounds it in these very, very
yeah,
personal narratives, like that one woman who is selling rabbits either for pets or for meat, and you get to
right,
choose, like, do you want to eat it? Because I'll kill it and you can eat it, or like, you can have it as a pet, but like that's where she's driven to because of
right.
there's nothing
Ugh,
else out there. And then the other heartbreaking scenes were with the guy who's, I think Michael Moore even says, "Oh, this is the only guy who is now have more of a job than he did before, which is the one enforcing evictions." And he goes around
right.
and evicts people, like, and that's he's like, look, it's not like I'm just the guy, like I don't want to do this, but it's my job. And all these people just, basically getting their stuff. There's even a scene in Christmas. I think they're like dragging out a Christmas tree because they have to evict
Horrible.
these people because the landlords is just really terrible. But I think that the what this movie speaks to is the solution, which he kind of dances around. He doesn't come up and say, this is what we need to do, but is having power and fighting and not just kind of rolling over and letting, the
Hmm.
the owners take everything away from you. You need a strong union and you need to fight back. And that's why when you take that away, all of a sudden now your town gets decimated. So
Yes.
I think that again was the message that I took away when I first saw this film, and even now, especially this year, with all these unions showing a lot of strength and getting all, the UPS workers got what they wanted, the UAW got what they wanted, and so did SAG and
Yeah.
WGA. So it's just great to see that yes, you do have to fight. There's even a sequence in this movie where there's a sort of he kind of goes through all these different answers that people have, and one of them is like, oh, religion, and these preachers come and they try to comfort you and say, look, be humble. It
Mm.
sucks things, but just, be happy that you have your health or whatever. And it's sort of telling you just don't do anything. Like it's
Yeah.
sad, be humble, don't fight, don't try to take the power back or anything like that. And yeah, that message does resonate with a lot of people, but it's not really the answer. That's just giving
Right.
up, and essentially, as well
Yeah.
as like working at Taco Bell. Like they're like, yeah, well now there's a Taco Bell in town, and I'll just get my minimum wage job there instead of my union job, which would allow me to get all my kids through college. And that is also giving up, right?
Yeah.
But it's a sad fact that a lot of people face both of those answers. Like, what else can you really do because you don't have the power anymore? The unions
Yeah.
are not in charge, and it's just this
Yeah.
Roger Smith guy going around firing people and decimating these towns.
And the rich people, they sort of just weave the narrative around it. Like I love those, I mean, they're not love because they're horrifying, but the scenes at the country club where they're
Oh
talking to all
yeah.
the rich people, they're like, no,
Hmm.
it's fine, it's great. And And some of it might just be because of ignorance, because they
Hmm.
just literally don't even know what is happening. But
Hmm.
then, of course, the other big part perhaps is just keep things as is, because they're obviously benefiting from it.
Hmm.
But that's also very human, which is sort of what I love about the whole piece is that the bad guys are not just cookie cutter, one dimensional bad guys, because these are real people. They
Hmm.
literally are real people. So
Right. It's a documentary. Yeah,
you
these are
you
real people.
see, yeah, their humanity as well. Like, everybody has a bit of delusion in them. So I think that's kind of interesting. It made me think of just living in San Francisco where there's so much change that's happened here, right? This city is
Yeah.
crumbling in many different ways, and there isn't much of a solution. And it's so much of this, right? Like people who are of means, it's so easy to, be eating truffles and your uni pasta or whatever, in like a fine dining restaurant in the city here, and sort of talking about the problems of the real people.
Right.
And then you have some, even though you might empathize with them and such, then you go back to your, you know, $20 avocado toast.
Hmm.
That's sort of that, right? And
Right.
it's done. You said all the things and then you just sort of back to it. And I'm guilty to that too. You know, what can you do? But maybe there is more we can do, I think. And I think this movie made me think about that too, because it's so easy to just sit in an ivory tower, even if you're empathizing with the problems
Right,
of the
right.
people and not do anything. And by doing so, you are then part of the problem in some way or the other.
Right. And like in these situations, it is like structural issues of the problem. And I
Right.
don't blame the people, like you said, that are sitting there reading avocado toast. Like, they're not, yes, they contribute to the problem, but individuals, they're not the problem. Like, this is
No,
not a people problem. It's a
no.
structural problem. And until we
Right.
upend the structures and tear that down, this is still going to keep happening, which is what I think the message of this movie is we have to join together to try to dismantle these systems, because that is what's holding us back. It's not an issue of a bad person. It's just a
Yeah, it's
system that
not
we're all
about eat the
operating within.
rich, because
No, no.
those are also just people,
Right. Well, some of them.
ultimately people who
Yeah.
are below, they're also trying to get there, right? So it's not like
Right.
no, people don't want to be rich and live in nice houses or have like safety and security.
Of
Everybody
course.
wants
Of
that.
course. Everyone wants, exactly. Everybody wants
Yeah,
that. Right, right, right.
yeah.
But yeah, it's about how we get there. And actually, I think when you're talking about the country club scenes, or did you think are great, and these women, these old women who, yeah, maybe they're lying to themselves a little bit, because I do believe they believe these narratives that they're saying. That the only person in this movie that seems to be telling the absolute truth is the lobbyist or the auto
Yeah,
companies, where he's like, "Oh, we don't care about Flint. Why would we care about Flint? We're just about making money. Like, we don't care
right.
about the town whatsoever.
It's
Why
it's
should
the
a
honest
company
truth.
why should the company care about the town, right?"
Yeah,
And the rich in the town sort of feel like, "Oh no, this is good for the town and it's help
right.
Flint." And which, again, maybe they're lying to themselves, maybe they actually believe it. It doesn't really matter, but that guy was right. And it's
Right.
true. Like, you can't
Yeah,
attack a company for just caring about money. That's what they're meant to do. That's
yeah,
that's the purpose that they are. And they can just destroy a town. Who cares? As long as they move
yeah,
somewhere else and get the profit, that's all that matters. And I love those
right.
scenes with that lobbyist, because he's telling the truth. And it's like, yep, at
Yeah.
least someone's admitting it. Now, what we
So
do about it, yeah, maybe is that's a problem or not? We don't know. Let's talk about it. But at least we're being vocal about what the actual issue is. And I think that's something that people just don't do a lot. Even
yeah,
with the problems today, they try to find some way to, oh, actually, it's this and it's for this. It's like, no, just say what it is.
just say what it
It's
is. Yeah.
just they're just in it for the money, which is, hey, that's why they're designed. Like, we can't
Right.
fault them for that.
No, I totally agree. No, it's fun to good that you put this on the list, and definitely very resonant for the year, and especially where I live. I think about these
Mm.
things on a regular basis. So it was kind of relevant from that standpoint too.
Yeah, it's a lot of the same issues down in LA, and obviously again with the summer with the strikes. I mean, it was very empowering actually to drive around and
Mm,
see on every studio lot there'd be picket lines for months, and it's great to see again people taking action and fighting for
mm,
control over their own lives. So it was
mm-hmm.
very empowering, and also again I loved sort of walking the line that one day with all my friends. It was a great experience that this film captures well.
Go President Drescher. It's just very funny.
Yeah, President Nanny.
Yeah, or that.
So, speaking of other films and things, were there any movies that didn't make the list for you this year?
I guess Oppenheimer and Flower Moon were
Mm,
both pretty seminal movie-going experiences, but also relevant in many ways. So
hmm
I was thinking about those for sure, but they might come up on a different episode. So
Potentially,
yeah,
yes.
yeah,
A little teaser there for a potential
yeah.
episode.
What
Yeah.
about you?
So for me, just with once I sort of looked at the themes first. So I had
Yeah.
my AI themes. I was thinking for a while, maybe Her, artificial intelligence, the Steven Spielberg film, or Terminator. There are a couple other films about unions and labor movements, like Matewan, Normal Ray, and Newsies.
Mm,
But I think again, Roger Me kind of captured that a lot better, because it was the first one that sort of introduced me to the concept of labor movements. And then the Battle of Algiers, a film that I
mm-hmm,
almost put on the list because I think that is a film that sadly becomes more resonant every time I see it over the decades.
mm,
And especially this year, I feel like that movie captured 2023 in a lot of ways. But maybe
I've
we'll
never
talk about
seen
that
it,
in
a
a future
big
episode.
blind spot for me.
Incredible. Yeah. And you watch it and you're like, this might as well be the news.
Oh wow.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a great film. So why don't you tell our listeners about what we have coming up next?
All right, so next up in our series of filmmakers that shaped our love of film, we're going to be talking about Michael Mann because we have a new Michael Mann movie coming out, Ferrari. So excited about that episode. And
Hmm
then that actually marks the last episode of the year, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Alex, good job on us. We've wrapped another year.
Another year. Yeah.
Yeah. And then after that, we're going to take, as always, a month off for the month of January. Don't worry, we're not going away anywhere. We're going to be back in February, hopefully bigger and better. So look forward to that.
Yeah, we want to thank everyone for continue to listen. Maybe we got a lot of new listeners this year, maybe even following us from the beginning. We really do appreciate all of the listens we get across all the podcast platforms as well as on YouTube, and we're excited about what we have in store for you guys next year. Hopefully you'll be excited as well. A lot more movies, a lot more themes, and a lot more of our back and forth.
Yeah, and on that note, rate us, review us wherever you're at, because that really helps other people find us. But yeah, I echo what Alex said. It's been amazing to see this little thing of ours take shape and grow, and obviously all of that has to do with the feedback we get and the listens we get. So thank you for that. So until next time, see you soon.
Yes, and a happy New Year as well.
Oh, happy New Year as well, Mr. Sheffield.